10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 422. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 422 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope everyone had a great end of their August. Now it's time for September, which means that we got a new series on the way. And this month is going to be all about talking about a very important part of a very important form, which is rhythm changes. So we're going to talk about the bridge and some of the strategies that you can use to give your playing over the bridge a little bit more depth. Rhythm changes is a very flexible form, meaning that you can approach it a lot of different ways, right? You can play a lot of different chord changes. You can make it work with almost no chord changes. So it's a really interesting sort of playground, not only for improving your playing over that specific form, which is obviously a standby in this art form, one of those forms that, gets played very, very often, kind of like the blues. So it's one of those ones that we can use to accomplish a lot of things. And in a real world way, it's just a great thing to work on because you play it at jam sessions and at gigs. Now, the bridge is specifically interesting because there's even more flexibility on the bridge, in my opinion, on what we want to play. So I think the first thing that we should dive into is talking about sort of a base conception of the bridge. Like, where would you start on the bridge if you didn't want to do anything fancy, right? So let's set some guardrails first. So we're going to be dealing with rhythm changes in concert B flat, which is the most common key that it's played in. And after we play through the A sections, so there's the second A section, we obviously dive into the bridge. So the bridge, you can think about it at its most simple form as a big 3-6-2-5, but there's some caveats to that. So let's just go over what I think of as kind of the base form of the bridge. So if we're in the key of B flat, we jump up to a D chord, which is why I would call it 3. But we're actually going to play D7. And then we're going to move around the circle of fourths every 2 bars, and we're going to play all dominant chords. So D7 for 2 bars. Then we're going to go to G7 for 2 bars. And then we're going to go to C7 for 2 bars. And then we're going to go to F7 for 2 bars. And then that leads us back to the A section, the last A section, which starts on a B flat chord. Okay. So the reason why I said it's 3-6-2-5, if you want to do like pure Roman numerals, 3-6-2-5 is a great way to explain it. But the problem is that in the key of B flat, D7 is not a true 3 chord, right? It's not in the key of B flat. So essentially what we could call this is these cascading 5 chords that resolve to 1 chords that are also 5 chords. Confused yet? All right, so let me clarify a little bit. So if we think about this D7 chord that the bridge starts on, a great way to think about it would be it's 5 of G7. And then G7 is 5 of C7. And C7 is 5 of F7. And then F7 is 5 of B flat. So in essence, what's happening here is that we just have this cascading circle of fourths playing dominant chords that all lead into one another and then ultimately lead us back to the home key of B flat. I think that's really all the context we need for right now, because the series this month is going to talk about all the implications of what I just said, right? So let's dive into the material for this week. So what we have is a PDF. And if you are a Patreon member, just grab the PDF and start looking it over, right? So the first thing we're going to talk about is how we can harness the power of that 5-to-1 relationship by making a small tweak, right? So if you look at the first example of the bridge, I've done something really, really simple, and it's to emphasize the fact that these are all 5-to-1 relationships. So what you'll notice is that the first bar is just a plain old concert D7. But then I make an alteration to that D7 and it becomes D7 flat 9 in the second bar. And then it goes to G7. And then we see G7 flat 9. And then we see C7, C7 flat 9, F7, F7 flat 9. And then we resolve all of that to B flat. So why am I doing this? Why am I making this distinction? Well, if you think about the fact that all of these chords are sort of playing a dual role of a 1 chord and a 5 chord, what we want to do is we want to emphasize the 5 chord role on the second measure of that chord. How are we doing that? Well, we're adding tension, because remember, a 5-to-1, this is what last week's series was all about. A 5-to-1 progression is all about introducing tension and release. So in essence, what we're doing in the second bar is we're emphasizing the fact, hey, this is going somewhere, by adding a little bit more tension to the chord in the form of that flat 9, right? So that's what the point of the first iteration of the bridge is to sort of clearly delineate, okay, like the first measure of each one of those chords, we could think about it functioning as a 1 chord. But then on the second measure, we want to emphasize that role, that it's a 5 chord moving somewhere else. So let's hear what it all sounds like in time. Here it just kind of adds to the motion of it. One more time. So it's just like sort of a built-in way for us to think about it that will automatically put more tension into our playing, which is a really fantastic thing to do. Okay, so now on the second example on your PDF this week, I've just taken it one step further. So what I've done in the second measure is I've put the 2 of the chord that we're going to as well as the 5. So now in essence, I've just made it a full 2-5-1. So we still have D7 for a bar. But then in the second bar, instead of just moving to D7 flat 9, what we're going to do is we're going to put that 2 chord there. So it'll be A minor 7 to D7 flat 9 to G7. So if just adding a flat 9 to the second measure added some motion, added some harmonic interest, well, putting that 2 chord there, the 2 of G7, well, that's going to add even more, isn't it? So it's just adding harmonic interest by including chords and reflecting those chords in our playing. And then the pattern just continues. We're always going to include the 2 and the 5 of the chord that we're going to. So again, D7 for a bar, And then we go A minor 7, D7 flat 9, and then G7 for a bar. And then we're going to C, right? So we want to go to D minor 7, to G7 flat 9, to C7. Now we're going to F7. So we're going to go G minor 7, to C7 flat 9, to F7. And then we're going to do a 2-5 in B flat, C minor 7, to F7 flat 9, to B flat. Okay, so let's hear all of that without my annoying voice. So you can see really, really interesting. And all we did was we just like layered back from where we were going and made it more interesting. All right, so what should you do? Well, if you understand this stuff, you should basically start to play over rhythm changes with these two different templates of the chords and see what you can start to do to really, first of all, bring out the flat 9 on that second chord. And then on the second iteration, the second template, do what you can to make a contour in your solo that sort of outlines that 2 chord and the 5-7 flat 9 chord. And watch how interesting the lines that you are playing become simply by just thinking about different chords. If you were previously playing over the rhythm changes bridge and just thinking about, 2 measures of 1 chord dumping into the next one, maybe even without even realizing that that was sort of a 5 chord leading to the next one. Well, now all of a sudden, you really should have a lot more interesting things to say by simply just adding to it. Okay. And it doesn't need to be anything super complicated that you're playing. In fact, start with really, really basic stuff, but see if you can outline the alterations that we made. So see if you can really lean on that flat 9 in the second bar of each chord. And then see if you could really lean on the fact that the 2 chords there and then very clearly outline the 5-7 flat 9 chord. And just kind of experiment. That's really what it comes down to, is just sort of like taking enough cracks at this that you start to understand it on a deep level. Okay. For the $5 members, I'm going to include some trading tracks where you always get the bridge. And actually, that's another tip that I have for you is I do recommend doing it in context. So like playing over all of rhythm changes. You can isolate the bridge if you want to, but at some point you have to put it back into context with the A sections to really cement an improvement over this form. So if you hear me talking about the Patreon members and you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're new to the show, this is how we keep the show going. This is how we support ourselves in the form of a small monthly donation. And we use the Patreon platform for that. So if you want the materials that go along with this episode and every single episode that we've ever put out, you can head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and you can search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. All the information is over there, what you get, how much it costs, and you can sign up right away and get instant access to everything. So again, that's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners or patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Huge amount of shout outs this week from new members. So I wanted to mention everybody and say thanks. Thanks to WM, Mikkel, Marcel, Reeve, Ramundo, Alan, Jean-Marc, Vernon, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining up to be part of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. And of course, to all of the supporters we have over there, thanks. We could not do this without you. All right, so get to work. Just play over this bridge as many times as you can. All right. And just start to discover some of the things that happen when you start using these 2 different schemes. And if you really want to keep up with the series this month, do a bunch of work this week because we'll be introducing a new one to you next week. All right. Hope you're all doing well out there. and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.